Hello, team. That'll be my team and Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtains team. Hello,
and
welcome
my
to another.
team. Here, meet
Yes.
the team.
Well, welcome to another co-stream with the two Jonathans here, where we're going to be. Well, originally, we were going to talk about Jonathan Fink's experiences in Ukraine because he's just got back from Ukraine. So we kind of put this in the calendar to have a chat together. But actually, the first part of this is going to be breaking news discussion concerning what's going on with the peace negotiations, and I use that term very sort of loosely. There have been leaked telephone calls between Macron and Merz. Apparently, there is an awful. I mean, the Belgian Prime Minister over the last 24 hours
has been God,
highly controversial.
Yeah, I've been planning an episode for a while, which will be coming out probably over the weekend, and it is called Inevitability and Surrender. How Russia creates this idea, this narrative that its victory is inevitable when it's far from inevitable, as Ukraine has shown. I mean, they were spinning this line when they thought the invasion was going to take 3 weeks or whatever it was, 3 days or 3 weeks. We're now 4 years in. There's nothing inevitable about Russian victory and nothing inevitable about its strength. But this is the narrative they seek to create, because if you think something's a foregone conclusion, why would you spend your money, expend all sorts of things if the outcome is inevitable? And unfortunately, the words of Belgian Prime Minister look like he is completely reflexively controlled by that narrative. It's disgraceful, actually.
And then, I mean, we'll talk about that more specifically going forward. My general views at the moment, I've been not on a downer the last couple of days, but I think we're going to talk about what Dmytro Kuleba, the former foreign minister, has said. My position is that Ukraine are in a really difficult situation. I think the energy sector has been so badly destroyed, and I think that they are having personnel issues on the front, as well as young people. I don't know why they made the change of rule that young people could go abroad, because now they all seem to be running abroad. That's going to affect mobilization going forward. And I think that like I keep saying, I use this analogy of these two pressure cookers bubbling away, and whose lid will burst first. So for the Ukrainians, you've got the energy sector and you've got personnel issues, and land maybe to a much smaller degree. I don't think land's as important as people think, although you have to get it back once you lose it. But for the Russians, it's their economy really is in some interesting situation, is in an interesting situation at the moment, and they have their own personnel and material issues, but I don't think they're as bad, certainly on a personnel front, as Ukraine. So they're bubbling away. Which lid is going to blow first? And sometimes I look at the Ukrainians and think, oh, they at the moment, I think, Jonathan, I wonder if you agree, whether it looks like Zelensky actually does want to do a peace deal rather than appear to want one, knowing that Russia won't want one, and so he's like checking the boxes and doing the right things. Yes. Or is actually Zelensky and the Ukrainians, are they quite desperate for a peace deal?
Certainly, I don't think they're desperate for a peace deal at any price, because they'll be aware, despite all the issues you've talked about, the Ukrainian army is not at a point of collapse. Russia is still, 45 kilometers away from where they started in Donetsk, despite the optics of them taking so much territory and this, that, and the other. They've been hammering away at Pokrovsk for what it is 21 months now or something. And they're only just infiltrating the center, but they're doing it at a huge cost and actually huge risk, which isn't talked about. Huge amounts of their forces are retreated. They can no longer get hardware in there. And now they face quite extensive Ukrainian fortifications outside of that area. But again, this is about the narrative of Russian victory and inevitability. If they are going to create, take more territory, I should jump in here as well. Say, I debated last night one of the Kremlin's leading, I would say, assets in Western academia. He's a Norwegian professor who has appeared with Mearsheimer regularly, Sachs, and all the rest. And we had one of these sort of Twitter moderated debates. And this, it's interesting to listen to the stuff there, because all the talking points are about Ukraine being on the point of surrender, being the point of crumbling. This is actually not the case. And indeed, someone I met around Kiev said, yes, the electricity is bad this year, but all the cafes now have generators on the streets. If the electricity goes out in your apartment, which it did frequently, you just pop along to the cafe across the street and you have a nice cup of hipster coffee and you recharge all your devices there. It's massively inconvenient, yes. But he said, from his perspective, this winter feels no worse actually than last winter. And so there's a risk here of maybe overhyping some of these things and falling into the Russian narrative of this inevitability. Yes, Russia has more resources, but the strikes on Russian energy mean that you have a bigger problem when your economy starts to wobble.
Yeah,
you have more mouths to feed.
But I think there are some issues with Ukrainian baseload. I'm more concerned not with someone where they can sort of charge their phone or go about their daily business. I'm more worried about the huge energy needed for the military industrial complex to make things, for the industry to work, for commerce to work, because the economy is so important in Ukraine. And so that's where I would look at energy
I would
being
say,
like super important.
I'd say I expect actually that an even bigger problem, that is not to do that problem down, that is a major problem there. But we also know that Ukrainian Miltech is not nearly at capacity because one of the other restrictions on it is finance. So it's not just energy that's restricting, it's finance. So it's quite possible that factories that are only operating at 40% capacity, some of them will be able to work around these energy restrictions by scheduling and so on. The other problem here, which I think is a greater one, is financing. And of course, we're going to talk about Belgium and Central Russian bank assets. But Ukraine has a huge hole in its budget. This is one propaganda narrative which unfortunately has foundations in truth. The moving forward, that financial hole to keep Ukraine in the fight is just getting bigger and bigger, but the Russian central bank assets would plug it quite nicely for a period of 2.5 years, roughly 2.5 to 3 years. But the West seems to be losing its will. Georgie's just popped up. Is that?
Yeah. And yes, it is. So, and I very much like you contacted me, Georgie, some time ago with regard to doing a live together. So let's sort that out. Let's do it. But thanks for popping in on Jonathan's behalf there.
So I think the finances and all of this, as it has done from the early days of the war, it comes down not just to Russia and Ukraine and their intrinsic resources and strengths and weaknesses internally. These are incredibly important factors. The will to fight is important, but it's how far allies are willing to support their side to, one, stay in the game, and then to achieve incremental advance and ultimately victory. And it seems that Russia's partners are willing to put more into that fight in a more consistent way than Ukraine's Western partners. Now, I don't want to do down what we've been doing, because I know there's a tendency, especially in some American circles, to say that Europe's pathetic, Europe's done nothing, etc. I think we gently remind them that the US is not spending anything on Ukraine at this point, really, and is selling weapons to Europe. So this war is, on paper, if you were to do the sums, probably highly profitable for the US at this point. So I think that's disingenuous and a really quite repulsive argument. But it is true that Europe could be doing a lot more. Britain could be doing a lot more. And the stuff that we have promised and financed seems to arrive late and never in the quantities that are promised. And these fall well short of the quantities that are required to give Ukraine a strategic advantage. I think you mentioned Kuleba. That's more or less part of the argument he's made, I think.
I would do a little bit of, I mean, I don't want to be all too yay Brits, but actually I do think the Brits have done. I mean, we've got a load of missiles then ahead of schedule. We are pushing the boat, things like the Terrorhawk platform, the Bravehawk platform, the Raven platform, Challenger 2, Storm Shadows, so on and so forth. And we are now making Storm Shadows to get them regularly. In fact, one Storm Shadow went down yesterday.
Have we ramped up our production again? Of
yeah, so from July onwards, we're providing Storm Shadows. So Zelensky said recently something like we used the normal amount of Storm Shadows, or it's kind of a weird thing to say, but the implication was that they have a regular supply of Storm Shadows. So I think the UK is doing a pretty good job. You and I know that there's a lot that the UK does behind the scenes as well that can't get communicated to the general public. So yeah, I'm and Europe in general, I think, you know, they're working hard, but the problem is there's so many people working against, say, the EU. So the EU should have provided a whole package to Ukraine, but bloody Hungary have stopped that happen. So, you know, there are issues, but certainly compared to the US at the moment, I think it's very one-sided. Well, look, let's get into the breaking news then, Jonathan, if I may, and we'll talk through this to begin with, which this came from Spiegel, which is European leaders apparently harbour deep distrust of the US in peace talks with Russia and Ukraine. And this has come from a confidential conference call that seems to be leaked between Friedrich Merz and Emmanuel Macron, and several other top European politicians.
Not a big surprise, though, surely. I mean, anyone who's got the head screwed on, is paying attention, should be deeply suspicious of the motives of not diplomats, but a bunch of real estate guys that are being sent over to sell Ukraine out.
What's great here is that this is now explicitly formalizing what everyone knows. Like, everyone surely knows that European leaders are going to go back, speak to each other and say, my God, that Trump's a dick. Do you know what I mean? Like they must be just saying, like, oh, this is doing our nut in. He is working against our objectives. He's working against his own national objectives, I think, and strategies, and he's working for the Russians. So, yeah, but I wonder, with these leaks, you never know, like, who sanctioned these leaks, and that's always an interesting thing to consider. We've got Politico talking about the Spiegel article. Macron warned US could betray Ukraine in leaked leaders' call, Spiegel reports. So, according to a transcript obtained by the German outlet, Europe rallied around Zelensky and sharply criticized Washington. So, do you mind if I just read a bunch of this, because I think it's absolutely fascinating stuff. French President Macron warned the US could be about to betray Ukraine, quote, betray Ukraine, according to a leaked transcript of a call between European leaders.
I think we've had plenty of that already.
For sure, yeah. Strategizing about how to protect Kiev. The details of the phone call, which took place Monday and involved Macron. So this is very recent, right? Macron, Merz, Mark Rutte, Finnish President Stubb, Zelensky and others were published by German magazine Die Spiegel, and saw the leaders discussing US-led peace negotiations with Kiev and Moscow. Quote, there is a possibility that the US will betray Ukraine on the issue of territory without clarity or security guarantees, Macron said, according to Die Spiegel, adding there was a, quote, great danger for Zelensky. The Elysee did not immediately respond to Politico's request for comment. Spiegel reported the Elysee denied in a statement to the German outlet that Macron spoke of any betrayal. Quote, the president did not use those words. Macron's office said to this, as per Die Spiegel, of course, he would. Merz chimed in that Zelensky had to be, quote, extremely careful in the coming days. That's interesting. Quote, they are playing games both with you and with us, Merz said, seemingly referring to Washington's envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of American President Donald Trump, who spent 5 hours locked in talks with Russian leader Vladimir Putin on Tuesday. Also worth noting from that, Jonathan, and we'll pause there for a second, but Kushner and Witkoff were kept waiting, which is quite normal for Putin to do, for 3 hours.
Absolutely normal.
I think they had to walk around Moscow, and it might have had the added benefit of showing them that Moscow was quite normal, maybe, that Moscow was operating effectively as a capital city, and compare this to Ukraine and so on and so forth, and then get them in, keep them waiting, show them who's in the power position, etc., etc.
This is par for the course, isn't it? It reminds us of the Tucker Carlson little sort of tour, marveling at the wonders of shopping carts and supermarkets. Well, Moscow's always been a showcase, in the way that Berlin was also East Berlin was something of a showcase, a Potemkin facade to show that, you know, communism was all wonderful and beautiful and functioned so well. That's not how people in smaller cities and out of the way places lived. It's the same in Russia. Russia is in no way representative of how the majority of Russians live. But it does look sparkly and glitzy, and that's no surprise, because all the wealth is concentrated there, all the wealthy are concentrated there, all those that have had their hands in the till. This is not a big surprise, and unfortunately it does create an impression. That's not the only impression, you know. As we know, the Trump was always impressed by you know, the smell of cash and you know, the herds of pretty females that whatever, we won't go into details there, but they do have things that will attract foreigners. It's the same in the 1930s, going back to Walter Duranty and the extraordinary temptations of drugs and flesh that people are prepared to to jump into in order to spin lies and narratives. I think we need to kind of dismiss all that stuff and look at what's going on here. The underlying trend, I think, is that almost everything that Trump and his acolytes do is performative. The real story behind the scenes is, who is Trump? He's a property dealer, and he is treating this entire thing as a property deal and not on behalf of the American people. Really, this is a process of what can he get out of it and what can his friends and relatives get out of it as well. This is, personal enrichment, an attempt to achieve it on an extraordinary scale. If that's the basis, then how is he going to cash in? That's the question we should be asking, not endlessly pondering about whether this is real, whether it's not, whether he's an asset, whether he's not. It's the question, how does he hope to cash in from this process? And how disappointed will he be when it seems that neither Ukraine nor Putin are going to play ball? He can try to drag them, he can try to push those horses to the trough, or slap them by 2x4s, as Kellogg so obscenely said. They are not going to come. They are not going to make peace. He is not going to get his deal that will allow him to fill his boots and pockets with ill-earned cash. But that clearly is the motivation for getting this done. Maybe he also wants, the cachet of a Nobel Prize, a little gold bauble that money can't buy. But I think basically that's it. It's money and status. And we have to work backwards from there to see how this will, at least the attempt, will play out.
So before we get back to what I think are actually astonishing leaks, these are absolutely astonishing leaks, and because they are saying exactly what we know is going on inside their heads. But this will get to the Americans. I wonder if there's been a bit of thought put into it. People are asking in the live chat, who has leaked this? That's the question, golden question, and it could well be coming from the intelligence services of any of the countries involved here. Because actually, I think there's a utility in the US knowing this explicitly, but also you risk sending the US against Ukraine and towards Russia. But just one thing to reiterate something I said in another video the other day, which is I was talking about just one of my many videos, but there was the rest is politics, Alistair Campbell, Rory Stewart chat about the peace negotiations, and they talk about Jared Kushner. It's like, what is he doing there? Like, the only reason he is there is to do business deals, because Rory Stewart was saying, because Rory Stewart was in international diplomacy with the previous Conservative government as a minister, right? So he knows a lot of people, speaks to people, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I've spoken to people during the peace negotiations in the Middle East, and they, I speak to an ambassador that go and see Jared Kushner and about peace, and the half the meeting would be spent on business deals. He'd say, right, I don't really want to move the conversation on to this, so how can we get a business deal going, blah blah blah. That's what Jared Kushner was doing. Like, that's what he did before, that's what he's doing now. So if he's involved because the Trump family, or America more generally, just wants to grift off peace negotiations with Russia.
This is it. They want to monetize the land that is handed over, and persuade the Russians to pay top dollar for it. I think one of the US commentators on it was either Bulwark or Midas Touch, I can't remember which it was, basically described Kushner as less a negotiator, more the bagman. The guy that carries the sacks of cash that they're hoping to that will exchange hands once this supposed deal is done. So this is the story. The rest is just fluff and distraction designed to, keep our attention away from the true story, which is the business deal of the century, of Trump's career, in fact.
Yeah. So just to reiterate what's said here, there's a possibility that US will betray Ukraine. Remember, that's what Macron said. Mertz chimed in that Zelensky had to be extremely careful in the coming days. They are playing games with both you and us. That's Mertz's position, which is the US is playing games with Europe and Ukraine. Absolutely incredible. Mertz's spokesman.
What do they mean by games, Jonathan? What do you think? Let's try to put some flash on that, because we've seen games being played for many months. But if it's going up to into high gear, what could those games be? It might be worth speculating.
What do you mean by that? I guess they just the games they want is like we want to make it look like we're interested in peace, but actually we're interested in trade deals, and all they're doing is playing Ukraine off against Russia or whatever it is, until there is some kind of material benefit for.
Well, let's dig a bit further, because Trump's method of, and I've spoken to a couple of guys who come from New York real estate, and it's remarkably close actually to Russian negotiating tactics, which is you want this thing, right, which your adversary or whatever or interlocutor is not prepared to give. So what do? You ask for far more, and you use outlandish threat. You use the sense of absolute scarcity and immediacy and all the other sales techniques to create a pressured environment where the person you're trying to deal with is no longer thinking rationally. They're at a point of desperation, even though they've been moved into that psychological state. So this isn't just, if they're playing games, something's going to come along with it, I would suggest, which is some form of threat, some form of really below the belt thing that will freak out and panic. Whether or not, they actually want to deliver on this or not, I would guess here that some of the other phrases we're hearing from Scott Bessent and others tie into this, which is to coercively control Europe into appeasing and relenting. One of those things could be, well, we're not going to come and protect you. Under Article 5, we may or may not sell weapons to you. Of course, they're going to contain kill switches, but we're not. The cavalry is no longer coming. So you better give in now, because you're going to be screwed later. I think we have to think through what those negotiating tactics would involve. So they're pretty damn scary.
Get a load of this. So we have the Deputy Secretary of State, so the guy under Marco Rubio, berating Europe over the last 24 hours for wanting to buy European military equipment and not American equipment. It's absolutely staggering. So top US official berates Europe over cutting American industry out of defense buildup. Why are you doing this? On the one hand, they've just been, we in Europe have been told, you need to stand on your own 2 feet. This is your problem. This is your war. You need to be the ones that are supporting Ukraine. And then on the other hand, they say, but if you do that, you have to buy everything from America. Like if you do that, we want you to stand up on your own 2 feet, but only so high. Really, we still want you to be dependent on US tech and US industry. Absolutely astonishing. And so it's really interesting you mentioned that, because the games that are being played are essentially, how can the US, and I'm sorry for my American friends who are not having a big rant about the US, this is the Trump administration, but how can the US benefit from this situation? Well, they can benefit from trade deals with Russia, benefit from extortion of minerals from Ukraine and trade deals with Ukraine, and they can benefit from making Europe use the Pearl Initiative to buy as much stuff from the United States as possible, while charging an extra 10% markup and not giving anything to Ukraine themselves. So all of the above.
Back in the days of the Cold War, there was a particular left-wing sort of conspiratorial point of view that actually all of this kind of aggression between the superpowers is simply engineered almost behind the scenes between them to keep their relative military-industrial complexes going. Now, I think anyone who's studied sort of Russian paranoia, Bolshevism, etc., will know that the desire to take over the world was real, and amongst Putin, who has inherited that same mindset, it is real. This isn't just a mutually agreed conspiracy. But what we have in Donald Trump is someone who is more aligned with Putin and more aligned with that Russian worldview than anybody else in American political history. It is entirely feasible and plausible that they may be thinking, well, this is rather a good thing. We don't think Putin's going to overrun Europe, but certainly he can threaten it, and they're going to be buying weapons left, right, and center. Well, this is rather nice. I know I'm entering a sort of conspiratorial thinking, but how are you going to sort of cash in on this environment of fear and the move away from the rules-based order? Well, that's easy. you have two malign forces in the world that claim superpower status. There's China as well, of course. There's a third. You have Russia and the US, who are no longer, one's no longer a reliable adversary and one's no longer a reliable ally. What do? Well, you cash in and you stock up on weapons.
So we've had Mertz saying they're playing games with us, both you and us playing games, and then Mertz's spokesperson saying, as a matter of principle, I do not confirm or comment on snippets of conversation. So essentially, yeah, this is almost certainly true. Then we have,
yeah, don't deny
Finland's Stubb has seemed to agree with Mertz, according to the transcript. Quote, "We cannot leave Ukraine and Volodymyr alone with these guys." So the idea that Zelensky cannot be, like, Ukraine cannot be left to the dogs, left to the US and Russia to carve up here. Yeah. So there's a definitely us against them mentality of Europe against the US as well as Russia here. Yes. So he said, apparently referring to Witkoff and Kushner, who attracted agreement from Rutte. I agree with Alexander. This is Mark Rutte. We must protect Volodymyr, the NATO chief said. NATO declined to comment when reached by Politico. The call took place after the Trump administration circulated a 28-point peace plan, reportedly drafted by the Kremlin's envoy Kirill Dmitriev, Witkoff and Kushner, that was criticized, etc., etc. And remember, we've also seen the very powerful article in the Wall Street Journal that indicated that they're interested in business, not peace, really. Or certainly just peace. So yeah,
there's no conversation around justice here. There's no conversation really around security guarantees, around retribution is the wrong word, but any sign that you're going to get Russia to admit any form of liability, whether it's political, financial, or moral. None of this makes it into the document. I mean, yeah, some of it's tacked on to the 19 points. But really, I don't think that is a serious addition to it from the American side. It's just something they put in there to make the Europeans and the Ukrainians whine less from their point of view. I don't think this forms any real part of the pressure coming from the US. The other aspect of this, and I'll be interested to hear your point of view, is that all talk of incredible punitive sanctions, which you and I suspect that Trump never wanted to go through, but certain people in his regime, certain camps within there, Rubio, Lindsey Graham and others, were rather keen to proceed with, because they understand that without putting pressure on Russia, you're not going to be able to get anything like a dialogue going. All of the result of this so-called sort of peace, dare I call it fake peace, is to put all that on the back burner. Well, now we start to get at Putin's real motives for all of this, which is divide and conquer, I think, primarily. But the second one is, as a result of that, to delay sanctions and delay any kind of military and financial support for Ukraine. We're also seeing that with the frozen Russian assets, because the more Russia is appeased in the mind of certain timorous, pathetic, morally bankrupt leaders like that clownish figure in Belgium. Sorry for any Belgians on the call here, but he is a weak, vacillating, pathetic little squit of a man. You give them the excuse.
I've got quite a few Belgian viewers.
Yeah, well, I apologize to them, but he's ghastly. Well, let's start on Rutte as well and upset our Dutch viewers, although we probably won't, because I know many of them agree that he is equally pathetic, conniving, and appeasing.
I somewhat disagree there. I disagree a little bit. I think Mark Rutte, and this was apparently the case with his premiership, was a bit of a slippery eel, and he would say whatever people wanted him to say.
Yes,
but that's exactly the kind of person you need to try and manipulate Trump. He has successfully.
But if that was the purpose, I rather fear the purpose of him being placed there is somewhat different, Jonathan. I'll let you talk, but I'll throw this out there. He has acted as someone who has been able to keep the illusion, the facade up that there is unity between the US and the Europeans, and that NATO has real deterrence power. Unfortunately, that is not serving our interests at this point. If it does not have real deterrence power, and it absolutely does not, if it is no longer a united alliance, it is doing no one a service to be able to shore up that Potemkin facade.
Yeah, but that's not his job. Like, his job is to keep NATO being an entity, right? And the only way you keep NATO being an entity is to have the US on side. If the US goes of peace.
It's not on
then,
side though. It's the illusion that they are.
But yes, I don't disagree. Like, so there's very much an illusion that they're on side, but they also are on side enough that it hasn't completely fallen apart. So like I mean, this just comes down to, like, this goes
hasn't
back
been
to
tested. The minute it's tested, it'll crumble like a wet cake. That's the problem.
The problem is, in my opinion, that there are two worldviews, and I've said this to you before, I said this to my audience 100 times, but there are two worldviews going on in the American political scene, because it's not just the administration, it's actually the whole political environment, where you have Marco Rubio maybe as one of the only people in the American cabinet, in the Trump cabinet, and then you've got maybe the Department of Defense, like, career people, and then you've got the CIA and FBI career people, and then you've got establishment politicians. And I'm not using this as an insult. I mean, I crave for establishment politicians in the American political scene at the moment. These are the people who understand geopolitics, and even like Lindsey Graham. I mean, he's a weasel in so many ways, but he understands who Russia are right? Yeah. Who Russia is, and these people are fighting for a decent support of Ukraine and putting Russia under the cosh. And then you have the isolationist Heritage Foundation, I would say wing of the government, but they are the government. Like the Project 2025 White House is a Heritage Foundation compromised by the Kremlin run thing, and they have this isolationist, like JD Vance, MAGA approach to, you know, you can throw in Elon Musk, David Sachs, and Peter Thiel in there as well, and then you've got all the other cabinet members. They would happily see Ukraine go down the gutter. And so those two factions are you know, in tension with each other in the United States at the moment. And oftentimes we are unfortunately seeing the Trumpian JD Vance Heritage Foundation side win out, and that is just thoroughly depressing.
If they can make money in the process, then I think they will have little care whatsoever for either, as you say, the international norms, the legality, any of the humanitarian aspects. I don't think they care about any of these anyway. But if they can cash in on that process, that will actually be an incentive for them to drive this harder. So I think this is, at some point, and we've been saying this for months, haven't we? At some point, Europe and Ukraine is going to have to say, no more. We're not going to sign up on this. I still think partly I think there is more pressure on Zelensky because of the internal political scandals and the fact that Yermak did so much of the detail around to support Zelensky, you know, in some ways what to do, maybe even what to say, how to approach things. He will be feeling somewhat sort of lost without that. And let's not underestimate how important it is to have, you know, let's say a manager figure who really is over all the detail, which Yermak was, for good or ill. But Zelensky also knows that if he gives in to certain things, he'll be facing an untenable situation at home. He will not be able to persuade the army to hand over the remains of Donbass, for instance, or any of the large cities. That will not happen. And dare say I'll go out on a limb, he would find himself with a kind of local insurrection in some ways. This is not going to happen. And the army is not crumbling. It's not on the point of failure. It's not on the point of catastrophic defeat, despite, as you correctly listed, many of the problems it is facing. It is not on the point of imminent collapse. So there's no reason why he should give in to such onerous conditions, especially when it's obvious that you know, the overall tone of this is profit for Witkoff, etc.
A couple of things to say. One, talking about Marco Rubio being in this one faction, he is also, like, his soul has left his body and his eyes are dead. And you listen to what he was saying in the negotiations with Ukraine recently. It was all about profit. It was all about GDP, not profit. It's all about sort of business, GDP, prosperity. And so I think he is probably against his own volition, towing the party line with Trump a lot more than he would want to do. So that's one thing, which is bad news for Ukraine. Other thing, someone mentions here. So Petrag says, please read the book of the former NATO General Jens Stoltenberg on my watch, leading NATO in a time of war. So I haven't read it, but I do understand from this book that one of the things he says in the book is that he thought NATO would fall apart and cease to exist at the beginning of the war, because he was in charge of NATO at the beginning of the war, and actually his job was to keep it existing as a thing. And that's kind of Mark Rutte's job. And that, what you've got to understand from Mark Rutte's point of view, is that he's just got to work out how to keep the US not giving up on NATO. Like that is basically, that's his job.
Or openly sided with Russia. I mean, I've always said that this game is to prevent the US from openly, let's say, even arming Russia or removing sanctions in their entirety. So I guess there's a job to be done there, and he has to pretend NATO is real and whatever. I just sometimes feel that he probably, as all politicians do, they fall for their own propaganda at some point and forget what the initial mission actually was. I suspect he falls into that.
Well, I just think, like, if you understand his mission as not being NATO's like objectives in their kind of, I don't know, mission statements, but his mission is the US doesn't walk away from NATO, and that if he can maintain that until a new president comes in, then right. There's a whole bunch more to say. Like, I'm interested in your position or in your thoughts on Dmytro Kuleba, the former foreign minister for Ukraine, saying in 2026 Ukraine will lose even more people and territories, and the terms of the peace on the table will be the same. We do not have enough forces to change the trajectory of the war. So that is the idea that Ukraine are in a spot of bother. They're not going to improve things on the battlefield. So therefore, I guess the implication there is they should try and do a deal right now.
All of these assume, and unfortunately, I think he's a smart guy and he comes up with some very interesting stuff. But all of this stuff, including the media dialogue, presumes that the aggressor is ready to make a rational deal and stick to it. What I've said all along, the long-term evidence suggests that it's not. Everything we're seeing suggests that actually, if he was a rational actor or economically a rational actor, Putin would have brought this thing to a close a long time ago, back in 2022, when it was clear that the large-scale war had fundamentally failed. He is a tyrant who wants to preserve his own life and will do everything in order to maintain that. And he's already very old by Russian standards and not necessarily in perfect health. We're not going to snuff it tomorrow, but he is not necessarily in perfect health and fitness, even though he may dream, the Xi Jinping, of living to 150. That is not going to happen. His number one objective is to stay in power. If he were to end the war, the economic house of cards that he's built would crash and crumble almost instantaneously. People would be questioning what all this was for, what was it about, why did we lose the equivalent of an Afghanistan every single month for several years in a row, and you will have hundreds of thousands of traumatized and many of them, trained to be murderers, etc., coming back from the front. He knows that will be massively destabilizing for his regime, especially if they come back to local economies that start to go into free fall with no jobs and opportunities. He cannot end the war. And yet, for many, many weeks now, the media have forgotten that side of the equation and only talked about it in these kind of theoretical terms of what the peace could look like. I'm sorry, there is no peace. Putin cannot have a peace. And if he needs a break, if he's aware, which I don't think he is, but if he's aware that he desperately needs a break, he will agree to freeze the lines where they are without all the rest of the stuff, or we need to keep pushing, as Ukraine's done. It started to sink Russian Grey Fleet tankers as they are heading to Russia to fill up. No, he needs war in all of its guises, and all the rest is just, frankly, kind of fluff. It's not going to happen, is my belief.
As people like Darren Corrigan in the live chat and others are saying, Europe evidently does need to stand up. They need to grab the nettle and do something really significant. The problem that Europe has, of course, is that it isn't this big unified entity. It is like the EU is an organization of 27 member states that all believe different things, and some vastly different. Like you've got Hungary, Slovakia, you've got Czechia now sort of going in the other direction. You have
wobbling.
I mean, my New Year's resolution for this year would be Peter Magyar in Hungary having a landslide victory there and bringing Hungary back on side. But then you have, we're going to go to the Belgian Prime Minister now and just discuss him. It sounds like he's your best mate. No one in the West truly believes Russia will lose a war with Ukraine. A Belgian Prime Minister stated, commenting on the EU initiative to transfer Russian assets to Ukraine. The confiscation of another country's frozen assets have never occurred before. Even during World War II, Germany's funds were frozen, etc., etc. So we're actually going to see what he said in its entirety.
Well, that's great, but we defeated Germany. Did we have the same intention of defeating Russia and handing those assets over to a democratic regime? No, we don't. I mean, anyway, don't get me started. I'll let you finish your sentence.
Well, yeah, I mean, he said a number of pretty controversial things, not least that, Russia will not lose in Ukraine, and claims of its defeat are a fairy tale and total illusion. He warned that Russian assets must be returned post-war and said Moscow threatened Belgium with eternal retaliation if confiscated. So his claim here, or at least one of the answers to a question, the issue of frozen Russian assets is taking up a huge amount of your time and energy. Is that fair? He answered, the pressure surrounding this issue is incredible. I have a team working day and night on it. It would be a nice story taking money from the bad guy Putin and giving it to the good guy Ukraine. But stealing frozen assets from another country, its sovereign wealth funds, has never been done before. This is money from the Central Bank of Russia. Even during World War II, Germany's money wasn't confiscated. During a war, sovereign wealth funds are frozen. And at the end of the war, the losing state must relinquish all or part of these assets to compensate the victors. But who really believes that Russia will lose in Ukraine? It's a fable, a complete illusion. It's not even desirable for them to lose. Wow, so that's a massive claim. It's not desirable for Russia to lose, he says.
It's I had some sympathy, and I have some sympathy of Belgium, because I think the risk needs to be socialized across the EU.
100%.
That should have been thought of right from the start. In fact, I suspect many European countries knew that right at the start. So this turns into just a massive time-wasting, delaying process, which means they don't have to take responsibility, and it would have inevitably known it would end in this place. But to cap that, and I think the rational arguments that come out of Belgium, that a small country cannot take that risk alone, which is perfectly sensible, he has capped this with comments that are so disingenuous that almost sound as if they were scripted, or could have easily been scripted by someone sitting in the Kremlin. He's shown himself to be a weak and vacillating worm, and should not be in charge of a burger stand, let alone a country.
Just on the subject of worms, Jesse Jansma here says these two idiots have no idea what they're talking about. Any idiot that comes along as a troll, probably a paid up troll, and then just says some vague statement, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," without actually substantiating the claim, like, is not worth my time. And yet I'm giving them time. But I just want to just go shoo, go along, you insignificant little troll, and like, you're not worth our time, because if you don't substantiate where we are wrong and why we don't know what we're talking about and what we don't know what we're talking about, what those substantive claims are, if you don't substantiate your claims, you are just a pathetic troll. So go and pathetic troll under someone else's bridge. Sorry, I just had to interrupt.
Yeah, we get a lot of those. And as I say, I had a dialogue yesterday. I'm not sure when it's going on X, but I was invited to one of these panels, and I was really in two minds, and I'd love to hear whether you think this is a good thing or not to be part of. But it's an X panel by somebody who does these debates where they get sort of pro-Ukraine chaps like us to debate, dare I say it, sort of usually useful idiots. But in my case, I think quite an accomplished propagandist on behalf of the Kremlin is someone I was debating with. But many of the arguments we've gone through will turn up there. And when you have Russian-aligned voices talking about illegality or legality or international law or any of this kind of stuff, it is beyond absurd and quite obscene, actually.
I'm going to finish off what I was saying with regard to the Belgian Prime Minister, if I may. Is that all right, Jonathan? Or
Yeah,
do you have
please do.
So he said, and at the end of the war, the losing state must relinquish all or parts of these assets to compensate the victors. But who really believes that Russia will lose in Ukraine? It's a fable, a complete illusion. It's not even desirable for them to lose and for instability to take hold in a country that possesses nuclear weapons. So the classic, we don't want them to fall apart because they've got nukes. And who believes that Putin will calmly accept the confiscation of Russian assets? Well, what if it has? Okay. And
what's he going to do?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I mean, they've been confiscated already, effectively, for 4 years, and he's done nothing about it. So this is just pathetic. Moscow's let
we
us
also know
that...
from internal Russian comms, some of which have been hacked, some of which have been leaked, that actually they're not expecting to get these funds back, and they have, to all intents and purposes, already written them off. And the point that Timothy Ash made yesterday is that talking about, suing in future, this is an entirely disingenuous argument, because they could have sued at any point to get these back. The trouble is, as Tim Ash put it, they have to suspend their sovereign immunity. That opens them up to all sorts of claims, international courts for reparations, reconstruction, war crimes, etc. They haven't done it now. What makes us think that at any point in the future, they're going to lift their sovereign immunity and send the representatives to The Hague or wherever to seek these assets back? Because it opens them up to counterclaims. The chances are infinitesimally small of them doing it. Therefore, the arguments against it, unfortunately, are entirely self-serving and pusillanimous. And the Belgian Prime Minister would absolutely know this. He wouldn't be sitting down thinking there's 100% risk of this. He's thinking there is a very, very, very small risk of this, and they haven't sued yet. So it's disingenuous, I'm afraid.
Yeah, indeed. Moscow's let us know that in the event of a seizure, Belgium and I personally will feel the effects for eternity. That seems like a pretty long time. Russia could also confiscate certain Western assets. Euroclear has 16 billion in Russia. All Belgian factories in Russia could also be seized. And what if Belarus and China also confiscated Western assets? Have we considered all of this? No, we haven't. I asked my European colleagues if they were willing to pool the risks incurred by Belgium. Only Germany said it was ready to do so. Without this pooling of resources, I will do everything I can to block this case. Everything. After this episode, if I have an international job after the 16th, it will be washing dishes. So he is going to town on stopping the frozen Russian assets from being used to certainly, I mean, it depends how they are used, in what way they are. So, he's going to town on stopping that from happening. And that's why Europe are now trying to come up with alternative routes that apparently they're making some headway with, but I don't know. This is causing a lot of people to get pretty angry with the Voivodeship. Gary Kasparov says short-sighted and morally vacant politicians and bureaucrats want to believe that seizing Russian assets is riskier than allowing Russia's terrorist state to topple the Ukrainian nation defending them. Yes, you have to take risks to win a war. You don't have to take any to lose one, he says. And by the way, someone asked about what risks did Belgium have. They do have risks if they are not spread out across Europe. So if Russia are able to come back and hit Belgium for 140 billion euros, then obviously Belgium shouldering all of that is massive. So there is an issue with risks, and I do understand some of what the Voivodeship is saying there. However, if that was overcome, then all of these criticisms of the Voivodeship, I think, stand. Someone else, Branislav Stanshev, says it never fails. Europe's ruling class is so deeply in bed with the Russian mafia state that it's amazing they don't all have villas in Rapino. So we have, here's a really big thread on, Bart Dvaiv's trips to Russia are now paying off for the Kremlin. He protects its interests and blocks billions in aid for Ukraine. Prime Minister of Belgium plays a central role in the debate over the frozen Russian central bank assets, as the majority of these funds are held in Euroclear, the central securities depository based in Belgium. It's estimated that Belgium holds between 185 and 210 billion euros of these assets. Bart Dvaiv, who is currently blocking the use of Russian funds for Ukraine, maintained close relations with high-ranking Russian officials before and long after the 2014 annexation of Crimea. Dvaivy himself emphasized that he had been visiting St. Petersburg since 1988 as a tourist, professionally and with his family, as he explained during a meeting in Russia. In April 2018, in the midst of increasing sanctions, Antwerp politician De Wever visited Moscow. During the visit, he and Mayor Sergei Sobyanin signed a comprehensive cooperation program. He also brought a large delegation of around 100 business representatives and organizations to deepen exchanges with their Russian counterparts, and so on and so forth. So this is a massive thread, 23-piece thread of De Wever and Belgium's, therefore, interactions economically and politically. And the idea is that this might well have something to do with why Bart de Wever is positioning himself as he is. Now, I have some people on my threads who are Belgian, some of which are critical of his position and some of which very much defend his position. So I would be interested going forward what some of my Belgian viewers think about this.
I mean, he really absolutely has a point about the distributed risk or the socialization of that risk. So this is a collective failure of will and vision of Europe, and I'm afraid it's entirely predictable. Months ago when they really started ramping up pressure on Belgium, this could have easily been foreseen. So I have some sympathy for that. On the other hand, these latest statements are craven in the extreme. I mean, he didn't have to say half of this stuff to still make an entirely rational case. So I don't know what's this coming from. And unfortunately, this isn't a neutral position. The statements he's made here will give incredible succor to Russia. They will confirm everything that Putin believes, is that we in Europe do not have the will to defend our own territory, our own values, our own financial systems, and invest in our own defense, especially invest in our ally Ukraine. This is giving a massive green light to Putin. And unfortunately, I have to say that this is a massive own goal. Whether he intended to give these signals out or not, it is a blatant invitation for more Russian aggression. That is what he's done. And he will hopefully have to answer that. What's this comment here? Apple doesn't fall far from the trees, blah, blah, blah. Collaborators. That seems fairly...
ouch.
Yes. World War II, someone's made a comment there. But...
so this is a very considerable article in Politico. I won't go through it, but it is how Belgium became Russia's most valuable asset. Prime Minister Bart de Wever is blocking a raid on Moscow's frozen funds to help Ukraine. Can anyone change his mind? So Belgium is now at the heart of discussions concerning assistance to Ukraine. So someone here says, I'm from Belgium. I see a lot of complete BS interviews with him that either didn't even happen or they make up crap for sensational distraction. Do you mean that us saying he says things that he didn't actually say, that actually doesn't, he's not as, obstructive? I don't know which way that comment would go there.
But it's his statement. We've read out from his statement. This isn't something other people have made up or taken out of context. This is a full published statement from him.
Yeah, which is I think full of outrageous claims. That statement there,
which
I think,
Jonathan, this other is the purpose. Now, if we think back to the number one tactic that the Russian Empire has employed throughout its growth and existence since the sort of whatever it was 17th century, divide and conquer has been the technique. You essentially look at your enemies, you find out what they've got that weakens them, and often that is internal political divides or factions, and you side with one faction against the other and you let them fight each other internally until they're weakened. When the strongest faction is weakened, you then pick a faction that your previous allies have got a beef with and you side with them. You weaken your enemies until the point where you can strike. This was the tactic they tried in Ukraine and believed they'd done enough to allow the invasion to happen. They ceded their own assets and people throughout the Ukrainian intelligence services, army, etc. And in Yanukovych, they stripped out the army. Divide and conquer is the absolute primary tactic. Everything else, from reflexive control, etc., they're all subsidiary tools in the toolbox that allow you to divide and conquer. What we're doing, dumping on the Belgian PM, is, I'd have to admit, is kind of what the Russian divide and conquer tactic wants us to be doing. It wants Europeans to be screaming at each other, and Brits and Europeans not to get on, and Americans to be divided amongst themselves and divided from their allies. This is the primary strategy that allows them, a weak state with poor resources and poor organization, to beat its better organized and, dare I say it, more civilized competitors by dividing them from themselves. And this obviously is working rather well in this instance.
Yeah, some people are saying that, and I'm not sure this is actually true. Someone was saying in the live chat that actually this wasn't what he said in the interview. But yeah, the interview. So the interview you talk about now is not what he said, but actually, you know, just as you were talking there, Jonathan. I mean, this is taken from a live. From a recorded, well, I don't know if it's live or recorded, but it's taken from this interview at Beaux-Arts on stage, and that is essentially the transcript of the interview. We were looking just then at the Google Translate of what was said there, but anyway, you can go and find that online variously, no doubt. Yeah, so it looks like the Belgian Prime Minister is certainly in the middle of some vociferous debates at the moment. The other thing to mention with regard to people's opinions and thinking about what Kuleba said and De Wever and etc., Finland's President Stubb, who's a staunch supporter of Ukraine, says he's frustrated after seeing the original peace plan and warns that a just peace in Ukraine is unlikely. Even if a ceasefire happens, it may end up as a compromise, not full justice. Europe must be ready for that reality. Now that is a bit of reality biting, maybe. So Alexander Stubb, who's a staunch supporter of Ukraine, saying it's unlikely that there's going to be a just peace here, which is a term that all supporters of Ukraine are using. America, interestingly, US does not use the term just peace. They say a quick peace. Trump has talked about explicitly previously. Marco Rubio has recently talked about a peace that involves prosperity but doesn't involve justice. Now, if you're talking about morality here, then
end the dying is the phrase, isn't it? They don't really go for morality. Yeah,
and so it's a shame that Alexander Stubb feels that way, but then I guess the question is, do we all feel that way? Do you feel, Jonathan, that actually a just peace is now unlikely? That you are
Russia, as I've said many times, Russians have never faced culpability for their innumerable historical crimes, going back, you can go back forever, but or at least until the state came to existence. But let's just go back to the Soviet period, the Civil War period of the Soviet period. It has never faced crimes for any of its citizens, for any of the innumerable suffering it's inflicted upon its neighbors. It got an absolute free pass after the Cold War. Russians were able to say, that wasn't us, mate. That was the Soviet Union. We're Russians. We had nothing to do with it. They've been given an extraordinary pass for all the grotesque evil they've unleashed on the world. And there's no reason to think that, unfortunately, they will be served justice anytime soon. In fact, talking with Zarina Zabrinsky just yesterday, we recorded, and talking with some service people who I was speaking to last week, who actually liberated towns and villages. Every town and village they went into across eastern Ukraine that was taken back from the Russians, they found the same pattern. They found basements full of torture equipment. They found instructions on the walls. It was a systemic process with a commonality of technique and equipment, and every single town and village had one of these. Russians did this in the full feeling that they would never be held to account, certainly not by their own side. They were encouraged to do so, and it was systematic, but they seem to have absolute impunity. When you speak to Sean Pinner, he will say the same. There is no sense in the Russian head that anyone will ever bring them to trial for what they've done, which allows them to continue these things with impunity. I'm afraid I do not see anyone calling to account now either.
Yeah, and then we have what Putin has said. So he's now in India, Putin, which is an interesting aside. At any rate, like getting closer to his BRICS mateys, possibly. The American side divided the 27 points of Trump's plan into 4 packages and proposed to discuss them separately. We do not agree with some points, but this is a difficult process. The dictator also reiterated that Russia will liberate Donbass and Novorossiya in any case by military or other means. So they're setting their stall out pretty obviously.
Let's remind what Novorossiya means to the audience, and what's
Try
your
and find a
understanding
map.
of the territories included in that. I believe that is all of the southern coast, including Odessa, and taking them all the way up to Moldova, probably up to and including the Transnistria and maybe the entirety of Moldova itself. So we're talking about an extraordinary swathe of conquest, if that's what he's still angling for. I have no doubt that he is dreaming of that.
Yeah, so that's broadly what it is on the map there, and then on the screen there. So then also, like, a few bullet points from Anton Gerashenko from what Putin said. Russia suggested Ukraine withdraw troops from Donbass and not start combat, but Kiev prefers to fight, so let's blame it on Kiev. There's no understanding that they've invaded Ukraine, and in fact, like, you had Zelensky reminding people, just to remind you, it's on camera, these guys invaded Ukraine, like, because almost reminding, I think, the Trump administration who are the bad guys here, like what actually happened. Like, we need to remember that you're trying to give our territory away, but you're giving it away to someone that's invaded. It's like a burglar comes around to your house and says, starts nicking everything, and the police come along and say, oh, right, okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll give you what's in the master bedroom as well. You haven't got that in your booty bag at the moment, but we'll just give you your stuff in the master bedroom and then send you on your way. Like,
yes,
no,
it is.
Freaking put them in prison and stop them stealing anything else. You don't give them more stuff.
I mean, but at this point, we're expecting some form of morality from Trump, and it's quite clear that he cannot ever think of Russia as the bad guys in the way that we do, because his brain always defaults to his primary understanding of Russia and Russians. Putin flatters him and manipulates him, even if they have periods where he doesn't get his own way. It's essentially a manipulative relationship there. Vlad Vex has talked very effectively about this. His memory, his direct experience of Russia is almost certainly the flesh and money, and Russia exudes strength. For someone who again, watching Mary Trump, this sort of makes sense. For someone who himself had what is alleged to be a rather abusive relationship built on humiliation by his own father, I think he not only admires the ability of Russians to wield humiliation as a tool of subjugation and control and to extract what they want, it fits very well into his own worldview. Because if you look at his own way he treats his so-called cabinet and those meetings, and actually going all the way back to his first term, humiliation is a core tool in his exertion of control over people. Threat and humiliation is at the heart of it. He operates in a way that is very familiar to the occupants of the Kremlin, unfortunately. So he will always default to that. And it's not about, Ukraine necessarily, having moral arguments on their side. He will always default to the party who appears to exude the most strength. And for him, strength is the ability to wield tools like a bully, like an extortionist, like an abuser, and who understands that humiliation is a core component of that. He will always default to that. You cannot erase that programming from him.
Yeah, and with regard to Putin, what else has he said? Russia doesn't plan to return to the G8. That's an interesting claim. Europeans need to get themselves involved into working on a settlement, not get in the way. I'll tell you what's getting in the way of a settlement: you invading and continuing to invade, you prime prat. Anton Gerashenko says Russia will...
Strong words from Mr. Pearce. You
prime prat. My comment: Russia will continue the war. Its rhetoric towards Europe is becoming increasingly more hostile. Russia can only be stopped by force. I mean, Russia is involved in a hybrid war with Europe at the moment. Where there was talk. The I newspaper did a report today on Russian spies coming in on cargo ships into the UK and hanging around and checking out like military bases and refineries and stuff. You know, we are at war with Russia, whether we understand it or not, and we need to treat them as such. One more thing, interesting moment. In the announcements of the interview, the India Today host kept saying that India and Russia had stood for each other through thick and thin. So that's a general emotional background with which they will treat Putin's visit. So that is all a bit worrying. We've got
ghastly, but it's true to form, unfortunately.
Yeah, Andriy Sybiha, the present foreign minister, says no compromises on Ukrainian sovereignty and no forced changes to borders. This position was supported by the heads of foreign ministries at NATO countries. So there was, in the absence of, I think, Zelensky and Umarov meeting with Witkoff and Kushner on the way back from the Kremlin, they were going to meet in Brussels, but the Kremlin told Kushner and Witkoff to go straight back to Washington, so they did. So then instead, Andriy Sybiha met with NATO dignitaries, the foreign dignitaries associated with NATO from all the different countries, and it was agreed upon that there should be, you know, no forced changes of borders. So you've got this situation where you've got NATO and Europe and allies of Ukraine standing together, and then you've got the US kind of in the middle but siding somewhat with Russia. You then got Russia, and then you've got Russia having been quite matey with China and India at the moment as well. So it's all, I don't know, fairly challenging times.
We pointed out very early on in this that we have an alignment of authoritarian forces, an alignment of malign forces, and frankly, little has changed except that the US has tentatively aligned itself with that part and not with the democratic world. And in the extreme transactionalism, it is more aligned with that portion of the world in terms of its actions. And indeed, if it does invade Venezuela, and in the actions of sort of shooting boats out of the water, it is aligning with the world that does not believe in things like the Geneva Convention and things like statutes of war or international conventions of any form and democratic conventions. We're facing I'd say extremely sort of toxic mix here. Maybe the one silver lining is that Ukraine, when it's weak, tends to reform around strength. And I'm going to explain what I mean there. At the points where Ukraine seems at its weakest, whether it's on Maidan or whether it's 2022 at the invasion, because it has a sort of a genuine democracy and this extraordinary stubbornness inherent in civic society, it tends to find inner strength to pull through these moments of crisis. It is not brittle. It is, as we call it, resilient, but not in the kind of cliched way that makes light of Ukrainian suffering. No, they're able to push through and find solutions to problems because they have a method of distributing that problem amongst the population and then being open to the solutions that come forth. That's not really how Russia works. And unfortunately, America is increasingly resembling a brittle Soviet kind of society that is papering over its internal divisions with authoritarianism in the government, and Russia is really not flexible and in that sense at all resilient. So what you're looking at here, I think, is regimes that are actually fundamentally weak in Moscow and Washington, but which want to exude strength by bullying what they perceive to be weak is Ukraine. But they've ultimately got that wrong. They've misunderstood Ukraine. Therefore, this is unlikely to end. It's likely to carry on until one side simply can no longer keep going. That's where I think, unfortunately, we're at, unless something fundamentally changes, which is what both Kuleba is saying and what Zaluzhny said on a number of occasions over the last year. Unless there is some fundamental change in the paradigm of war, whether that be an innovation that can scale or a massive increase in Western support aligned with certain victorious outcomes, then unfortunately you're going to see this slow attritional fight continue. And it's not clear necessarily whether it's Russia or Ukraine that is going to crumble first, but both are in a state of weakening, let's say.
Yeah, and here we have Trump repeating the tired old canards of Zelensky having no cards. He should have settled before. And it's very clear that Trump is in the worldview of these isolationists. He's being fed. I mean, I did a whole video on Trump not knowing stuff from quite a sort of technical
Just one
point
video,
of view.
yeah.
Well, but no,
marathon.
but like I wanted to really talk. That's a number of people have been stating that, and I was listening to another analysis today actually that again repeated, and I said this on my video previously, that Trump used to exist, and it sounds like a bit like, really, you're bothering with this kind of stuff, but he used to exist on Twitter quite a lot, and when he existed on Twitter, he actually heard and saw differing opinions.
Pre Musk.
Yeah, pre-Musk, but even in general, you'll get like people critiquing you or whatever, and often if they're famous people, then they'll be bumped up the algorithm. And so if you know, if a Democrat politician is going to criticize you on your feed, you'll see that type thing. Now he exists apparently almost entirely on Truth Social, and so
Fox maybe as well. It's been
but as a social media site on Truth Social, which is his own place, and there's no one. They are all his own like sycophants, right? So he's not getting a diet, and then he's existing in a media space where he has curated or he's purged the Pentagon, for example, the White House press corps of mainstream media of critical people, and when he does get difficult questions, he says, "Shut up, piggy, be quiet." Piggy, or whatever, or says you're fake news, I don't have to answer that. And so anytime there's a difficult question, he doesn't answer it, or they're not there because they've been purged. And then he's not going to like rallies like he used to, where he used to kind of pick up on what was popular and what wasn't when he'd say things at a rally. He's actually he's not traveling domestically anymore. He's doing more international travel
because of health, potentially.
But then international travel is like more demanding. But anyway, he's doing more international travel, less domestic stuff. He's getting up later, he's not doing as much work, and he's surrounded by people who are just curating his information, his knowledge, essentially, and he just is fundamentally lacking of any knowledge about anything that he needs. And so when he's casting his opinion on Ukraine, he just keeps going back to his default knowledge base, because he's getting quite forgetful. I would have thought that he goes back to Zelensky's got no cards. It's like, yeah, but you've been told, we've been through this again. You know, you've been shown maps. It's like, no, whatever. No, got no cards. Russia's a bigger nation. Russia can't lose because they're a bigger country. They've got 11 time zones, and they've got many more people. And haven't I told you about the steeples? All the steeples and towers are in rubble. Like the whole country's in rubble. And we're back to this kind of situation where, but the problem is that he's just got a fundamental lack of knowledge and so much that he needs to know.
It's knowledge, and it's also a resistance to information that doesn't fit into his preconceived framework, because no matter all the efforts made by Europe, and I'm afraid I don't think they've really quite twigged this, or maybe they have already, he defaults to a default setting. He's not a tabula rasa. He has been programmed, as I said earlier, to see Russia as inevitable and its victory to be inevitable. The rest of it then just must seem to him like a frustrating attempt by people just to stop things from happening. Maybe, you know, they just want to irritate him. But unfortunately, this is back to this inevitability thinking, but it also permeates so many in the analyst community. It permeates so many in the media as well. And unfortunately, I think if you were to have candid conversations with many people behind the doors of the European community, they may well also have that impression. Ukraine has shown us over and over and over that Russia can be defeated, has been defeated in the past. And if you give Ukraine what it needs, then Russia will be defeated. But unfortunately, the persistent propagandistic narratives kind of cut through. I might have to jump off in a second. I've got a...
Yeah, I know. We haven't even talked. We haven't even talked about your experiences in Ukraine. I thought I might get to this. It's been such been such a busy day. I mean, the final things I'll say then is that Trump here saying that Witkoff and Kushner had quite a successful meeting with Putin, and all that means is that there's ideological alignment between those people. So what else is there to just last minute say? Putin is morally responsible for Dawn Sturgis's death. This has come out today in the
that's
UK.
Interesting. I spotted this one. That's I guess this is a long process. This is the result of some kind of investigation, which
so there's been an inquiry into the Sergei Skripal poisonings in Salisbury that actually Bellingcat were involved in, finding out the information about the 2 FSB officers that came over, visited Salisbury for a day, then left, and Sergei Skripal was poisoned, his daughter was poisoned, but actually the only people that died, Dawn Sturgis was the one who died there because she got hold of the perfume bottle. She was given the perfume bottle by her boyfriend or something, who found it in a bin and gave it to her, but it wasn't. It was Novichok poisoning, and she sprayed it, and she died. Now the inquiry has said that Putin is morally responsible for Dawn Sturgis' death. There have been some minor sanctions put on today. I don't think mean too much, but that is an important, I think, statement that Vladimir Putin is morally responsible for the murder or for the death of Dawn Sturgis and for the attempted murder on UK soil of Sergei Skripal.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I think this is obvious to people, but of course law has its own way of working things through the system, but that's been clear for some time, as well as the culpability of Russia in this matter. But you know, in a rules-based society, things move slower, and that does give advantage to dictatorships who don't have to go through those hoops.
Well, look, mate, if you want to go now, because I've got about 5 more things that I was just going to tie up a couple of loose ends, just so I don't have to do it into another video. And when I close the stream, it'll close on your end. If you needed to go now,
great. Yeah, I'm kicking off another stream with Mr. Oh no, it's not your issue. I'm recording, so we could leave this on potentially for the viewers, and then I'm kicking off another live stream at 5 o'clock with Mr. Ashkin.
I'm just going to be another 10 minutes. So yeah, definitely, because there's so much has happened. I'm sure you
this is it. Yeah. So if I leave, it will carry on broadcasting, won't it? Yes, so I'm happy to let it run, and people get the lovely, warm, fuzzy joy of your insights.
Yeah, something like that. Well, look, thanks, mate. And next time we'll talk about your experiences in Ukraine. It's just been one of these crazy days.
It is one of those days. Maybe from tomorrow, while it's all fresh and doesn't, you know, out of date. Well, I'll let you go back to me about when would be good.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Will do.
Cheers.
Okay, take care, mate. And sorry, everyone else, you've got another 10 minutes of me.
Cheers, Jonathan. No, don't apologize for that. They'll love it. They'll lap it up.
Yeah, well, I'm not too sure about that. Cheers, dude. Right. Okay. So I just wanted to finish the thread of what we're talking about. So it was going through this idea of the peace negotiations, and you've got different views from, say, Dmytro Kuleba, Andrei Sybiha, Alexander Stubb, Bart de Wever. You've got Trump himself, Putin, and then we're sort of getting to now Zelensky. So we've gone through Trump, you know, saying the usual Trumpian sort of stuff. Zelensky, Ukraine is preparing follow-up talks in the US with Umerov, Natov, and key negotiators will continue discussions with Trump's team. President Zelensky has said there is a real chance to end the war. Pressure on Russia is essential. And I do get the sense, like I've said to you guys a number of times, that I do get a sense that Zelensky does kind of need this war to be wrapped up. Maybe there are some pressures that are just too much for the Ukrainians at the moment. Yet at the same time, Russia is so close to capitulating economically, at least, or being in serious trouble economically. I don't know that they would capitulate. There's an awful lot of resilience of the Russian people. I don't think it's resilience, passivity of the Russian people. So they're a very compliant population. Now, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are to meet with Umerov and others, no doubt, in Miami on December the 4th, which is today. So there are further talks that are ongoing, and it'd be very interesting to see how they turn out. Now, somebody that worth keeping an eye on, you've got Rand Paul. He's a Republican in the United States who is something of a libertarian. He's been very and correctly critical of Trump in terms of, I think, the war crimes with Pete Hegseth and the strikes on Venezuela and a number of other things. I think he's not a fan of tariffs, so on and so forth. But unfortunately, he's a little bit in bed with Russia. So days before Trump's 28-point plan dropped, outlets tied to Rand Paul were already pushing the narratives to justify it, says the Euromaidan press. The same senator blocked $40 billion in Ukrainian aid in 2022, and Ukraine accused him of spreading Russian propaganda. So he's one to maybe watch out for with regard to Ukraine. We've talked about the Deputy Secretary of Defense having a go at Europe for not buying enough American stuff, which I think is absolutely outrageous. Landau, who spoke first at the closed-door meeting, told ministers not to bully his country's defence firms out of participating in Europe's rearmament. He then left the room soon after the other meeting. The diplomat said that they had noted the ministers only staying for a short time was not unusual, but top US official berates Europe over cutting American industry out of defence build-up. A few more things now. About time someone from the UN actually, and Gutierrez, I don't think he's been particularly good on Ukraine, not nearly strong enough, but the UN here, the Secretary General of the UN, Gutierrez, says, I think it's important in relation to Ukraine at the present moment not to forget the principles. First, it was Russia that invaded Ukraine, not the other way around. Second, the solution to the conflict should be respect for the territorial integrity of states. Yes, I mean, it shouldn't need reiterating, but like I said earlier, for some reason people need to keep reiterating this because people forget that Russia are the bad guys and did the invading, and Ukraine didn't do the invading. So good, thank you, Gutierrez. But as someone says in live stream, he has been downright horrid concerning this war. Paul Guda-Deberitz says Rand Paul was in Moscow with his assistant Sergio Gore. Sergio Gore was the guy in the White House. He's now just been moved on. I think he's now ambassador to somewhere, but he was the guy that was responsible for hiring all the people for the White House. So that's 3,000 people in the new White House. So he is the guy that was born in the Soviet Union, ended up being a kid in Malta, and then now being at the heart of the American government. And you're like, you appear to have a Soviet Union chap right at the heart of the American government. He's seen as one of the three most important people in the American government in the Trump administration that you've never heard of. It's him, Schwartz, and another guy, I can't remember. Anyway, three of them. And he's one of them. So Sergio Gore. Ish. Right, just a few more points here. We have Dan Driscoll, the US Army Secretary known as an ardent advocate of military modernization. He's a guy that's been now point man for Ukraine. He's sort of replaced, well, he seems to have very much replaced Keith Kellogg. Keith Kellogg was a supporter of Ukraine and understood the conflict at least somewhat. Driscoll seems to be this new boy on the block, new kid on the block. Unfortunately, he's very much in, well, I don't know if this is 100% true, but he's certainly a friend of JD Vance. They were a friend at college, and the theory is that he's in the same kind of mindset as JD Vance, isolationist, Heritage Foundation, that kind of worldview. And if he's the guy that is the point man on Ukraine now, that is a concern. He's been thrust into an unexpected role as Washington's leading negotiator in Ukraine, despite having no diplomatic experience. He remains a key figure in the ongoing talks, which I think is a little bit concerning. And there you go. That pretty much sums up, I think, what I had to say today. Along with Mr. Fink, and I do apologize we didn't get to talk to Jonathan about his experiences. I just want to remind people very much, and this is relevant to Jonathan Fink's audience as well, because we are both involved in the same fundraiser, and you can use the same link because actually it goes, the landing page is the same for both of us, atpgeo.com/donate. Jonathan Fink will have his own one as well, but it goes to this same landing page because it's a joint one. And at the moment we're now over $7,000, so we've gone up a nice amount today in our fundraising for the 80th Air Assault Brigade. So if you can go along to atpgeo.com/donate and help out there, that would be super cool, and that's both of our campaigns. The other thing, and this is more for my audience than Jonathan's, I'm trying to be everywhere all at once. So Benny Pie's been working on a Facebook page, Instagram, I mean, things I don't understand, Threads, Blue Sky, Discord, blah 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 blah. So places that you can like hang out and get information, or at least get notifications of new videos. Anyway, that's sort of working. We're working at it. So if you want to look for ATPGO, all of these different places, please do so. And that is basically Benny Pie's doing. And I think that's pretty much it as far as my videos are concerned. Obviously, go and check out Jonathan Fink's interviews that he's doing pretty much right now, probably, and all of his amazing content. Please, if you are members, subscribers to ATP Geopolitics, please become subscribers if you aren't already of Jonathan Fink, and hopefully vice versa. If you are Silicon Curtain subscribers, you are welcome to become members of our team. We are. I can't speak for myself, but everyone else is a nice person. And yeah. I'll keep on top of things, and if there's anything crazy going on, I'll try and let you know. However, I am going to the pub tonight on my rare excursion out, and it might entail the odd pint of ale or glass of wine, and that could have an impact on my content. But anyway, thank you very much. Take care, and I will speak to you soon. I can tell my boys are back from school because I can hear a large amount of noise from things being hit outside of my little study. So take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips. Slava Ukraini.